Some recent headlines make it sound like Jensen Huang is standing over Intel's grave laughing. That framing is dramatic, but underneath the theater there's a real story, and it's stranger than a simple rivalry. NVIDIA is simultaneously Intel's biggest new ally and one of the biggest threats to Intel's core business. And both of those things are true at the exact same time. Start with the part that sounds almost unbelievable if you haven't been following it closely. In September 2025, NVIDIA announced a $5 billion investment in Intel stock, and the two companies revealed they'd be collaborating on custom x86 processors for both data centers and consumer PCs. Jensen Huang and Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan appeared together on a webcast to detail the partnership personally. This wasn't a minor licensing deal. It was NVIDIA, the most valuable chip company on the planet, taking a stake in the company it had spent years watching lose ground to AMD and to NVIDIA's own GPUs. On paper, that should have been Intel's rescue story, a validation. If the company most responsible for the AI boom believes in Intel's manufacturing and design future enough to put $5 billion behind it, that's about as strong a vote of confidence as a struggling chipmaker can get. And for a while, that's exactly how the market read it. Intel's stock rallied hard through late 2025 and into 2026, climbing to a 25-year high on the back of government backing, the NVIDIA deal, and renewed optimism about its next-generation manufacturing node. One estimate suggested Intel's stock rallied roughly 84% across 2025 alone, then added another 26% in January 2026.
This computing platform did several things incredibly smart. Windows was not just disaggregated, as you know. Windows was properly abstracted. It was architected just right. Systems BIOSes, open chipsets.
On top of that, a pace of recovery that looked almost unbelievable for a company that had spent the prior several years being written off by large parts of Wall Street. To understand why that recovery narrative mattered so much, you have to remember how far Intel had fallen. This was a company that, for the better part of 3 decades, was simply assumed to be the default choice for anyone buying a serious computer. It didn't need to be loved, it needed to be trusted, and for a long time it was. That trust started cracking when Intel's manufacturing roadmap stopped being reliable, and by the time Lip-Bu Tan took over as CEO, the company was dealing with a genuine identity crisis. Was it still primarily a chip designer competing with AMD and NVIDIA on product, or was it fundamentally a foundry business trying to compete with TSMC on manufacturing? Tan's answer, in practice, has been that it has to be both at once, which is an enormously difficult needle to thread even under ideal conditions. But here's where the story gets complicated, and where the laughing framing starts to make a strange kind of sense. At the same time, NVIDIA was investing in Intel, it was also quietly building the tools to compete directly against Intel's entire reason for existing. At GTC 2026 in March, Huang unveiled NVIDIA's Vera Rubin platform, including an 88-core Vera CPU designed for high single-threaded performance, built to sit inside NVIDIA's own AI server racks alongside its GPUs. That's NVIDIA building its own CPU silicon, in-house, to reduce its dependence on the very companies it just invested in. Then in June, at Computex in Taiwan, Huang went further, declaring flatly that the PC is being reinvented, and revealing NVIDIA's RTX Spark and N1 series chips, aimed squarely at the consumer and workstation CPU market, the exact territory Intel, AMD, and Qualcomm have carved up between them for decades. One analysis of the announcement described it plainly as Huang declaring war on Intel, AMD, and Qualcomm simultaneously, in the same keynote where he talked about reinventing personal computing.
That green logo you saw on gamer PCs in your college days, that was the beginning. And today the same company is literally powering the future of human intelligence. This isn't just a stock story. This is the most stunning tech.
NVIDIA built these chips in collaboration with MediaTek, a company with deep experience designing ARM-based systems on a chip, which gives NVIDIA a credible path into a CPU architecture it didn't previously have deep in-house expertise in. Huang went as far as forecasting a $200 billion CPU market opportunity overall, a figure that includes AI-capable PCs as a growing subcategory, and one that NVIDIA clearly intends to claim a meaningful slice of, rather than simply supplying graphics chips to. NVIDIA also isn't relying purely on organic development to build out this capability. The company's acquisition of Grok, the AI chip startup known for extremely fast inference hardware, folded another team of experienced chip architects directly into NVIDIA's expanding hardware portfolio, adding yet another lever NVIDIA can pull as it pushes further into territory that used to belong exclusively to CPU-focused competitors. So, which is it? Is NVIDIA propping Intel up, or is it building the weapon that eventually replaces Intel's core product line? The honest answer is both, and that's precisely what makes Intel's position so uncomfortable right now. NVIDIA doesn't need Intel to fail to benefit from this arrangement. It benefits either way. If Intel's foundry business succeeds, NVIDIA gets a manufacturing partner and possibly a second source of advanced chip production outside Taiwan, reducing its own geopolitical risk. If Intel's foundry business stumbles, NVIDIA still has its own CPU roadmap ready to fill the gap in the PC and data center markets that Intel is failing to hold on to. There's no version of the next 5 years where NVIDIA loses. There are versions where Intel does. That asymmetry is the real story behind the destroying itself from the inside framing. Because so much of what's actually hurting Intel right now has nothing to do with NVIDIA at all. It's self-inflicted, and it's been unfolding in slow motion for years. Start with the layoffs. Intel has cut roughly 35,500 jobs in under 2 years, with more than 20,000 of those coming in just the last several months under CEO Lip-Bu Tan, who took over trying to undo the excesses of the previous administration. His predecessor had launched an enormous spending spree, committing something like $100 billion to build new fabs across Italy, Germany, Ohio, and Ireland, and hiring roughly 20,000 employees to staff a manufacturing expansion that assumed customers would show up. They largely didn't. Costs climbed. Revenue declined as AMD kept taking share, and NVIDIA kept dominating AI compute. Tan has spent his tenure unwinding that bet, canceling fab projects in Germany and Poland outright, and pushing the timeline on the giant Ohio facility back to 2030, years later than originally promised. Then there's the foundry problem, which sits at the center of everything. Intel's newest manufacturing process, called 18A, is now producing Intel's own Panther Lake and Xeon 6 Plus chips, and by most accounts, the chips themselves are genuinely competitive, with one industry analyst going as far as saying Intel had done the incredible in benchmarks against Apple's M5 chip. But manufacturing yield, the percentage of usable chips that come off each wafer, has lagged behind where it needs to be for real profitability. One estimate from KeyBank put yields somewhere in the 65 to 75% range, below what the business needs to turn a solid profit on external customers. And that's the real vulnerability, because for now, Intel remains essentially the only major customer of its own most advanced fabs. Longtime TSMC customers, the companies Intel desperately needs to win over to make its foundry bet pay off, are still hesitant to make the leap, despite Intel's 18A process being technically comparable to TSMC's 2-nanometer node.
It's AI, AI, AI. NVIDIA is extremely proud of the deep integration that they're building into Windows in collaboration with Microsoft that will allow users to choose a model or models, create boundaries like when or if data is sent off device to the cloud, and then turn them into a
Intel's own CFO, David Zinsner, has been candid about the bind this creates. On an earnings call, he described the company's biggest near-term challenge as not being able to meet the demand its existing customers are giving it. Thanks to manufacturing capacity, Intel itself cut during leaner years and hasn't been able to ramp back up fast enough. Intel has called this a bottleneck of success, which is a generous way of describing a company that scaled down at exactly the wrong moment and is now scrambling to catch up to demand it didn't see coming. Markets weren't fully convinced by that framing. When Intel projected weaker than expected growth for the first quarter of 2026, despite otherwise solid results, the stock dropped 17% in a single session. There's a genuine irony buried in that yield problem too. One respected industry analyst who has covered Intel for 35 years estimated that roughly 75% of the company's entire stock valuation is effectively riding on the promise of its foundry business succeeding, a promise that, by his own account, Intel has not yet actually delivered on. That's an enormous amount of investor confidence resting on a manufacturing process that is still working through basic yield problems, still hasn't attracted a major outside customer beyond Intel itself, and still needs to prove it can produce chips profitably at scale before any of that promise turns into real revenue. Meanwhile, Tan has said Intel is going big time into the next node after 18A, called 14A, telling investors that multiple unnamed customers are actively evaluating the technology. Whether that translates into actual signed commitments or turns into another round of hopeful language that doesn't convert into contracts is probably the single most important open question hanging over the entire company right now. This is the part of the story that has nothing to do with NVIDIA laughing at anyone. Intel's struggles are coming from inside the building. A previous leadership team overbuilt manufacturing capacity based on demand that never fully materialized. Then the current leadership team had to slash that same capacity just before an unexpected surge in orders arrived, leaving the company unable to capitalize on exactly the demand wave it needed to prove its turnaround was real. That is not a rival sabotaging Intel from the outside. That is years of internal strategic whiplash catching up with the balance sheet all at once. Meanwhile, the AI accelerator market, the single most valuable category in the entire semiconductor industry right now, has almost entirely passed Intel by. NVIDIA's data center revenue alone hit $75.2 billion in a single quarter in early 2026, representing over 90% of NVIDIA's total revenue. Intel has its own AI accelerator line, called Gaudi, along with a custom ASIC business. But analysts who've covered Intel for decades describe the effort as meaningfully smaller in scale, arriving too late to challenge NVIDIA's dominant position, especially now that Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, and Google have all built their own in-house AI accelerators, rather than waiting on Intel or even NVIDIA to fill that specific need. Layer the CPU market dynamics on top of this, and the picture gets even more uncomfortable. AMD has spent the last several years steadily grinding away at Intel's server and client CPU share, hitting record revenue share numbers in the data center in early 2026. Now NVIDIA is entering the exact same battlefield from a completely different angle, not competing on traditional x86 chip design the way AMD does, but building CPUs specifically engineered to work seamlessly inside its own AI server racks, and, increasingly, inside consumer PCs designed around AI workloads. Huang's pitch is that the traditional PC, built around a general-purpose CPU with graphics as an add-on, is the wrong architecture for a world where every device needs to run AI models locally. If that vision catches on even partially, it doesn't just threaten Intel's market share the way AMD does.
Just save NVIDIA, it was a stepping stone to turn NVIDIA into the most powerful company in the world. And today, ladies and gentlemen, NVIDIA is worth $4.2 trillion, which is more than Apple, more than Microsoft, and more than the GDP of 185 countries in the world.
It threatens the entire category Intel's PC business is built on. None of this means Intel is finished. The government took a 10% equity stake in Intel in 2025 through an $8.9 billion investment, largely funded through CHIPS Act grants, giving Intel a level of political and financial backing no rival can casually match, and effectively making the U.S. government one of Intel's largest shareholders at a moment when the company's private sector fortunes were still very much in doubt. Advanced packaging, the process of connecting multiple chip dies into a single system, is another genuine strength, with Intel being one of only 3 companies globally capable of the most advanced version of this process, creating a real bottleneck advantage in a market where everyone is racing to produce enough AI chips. Intel's CFO has expressed confidence packaging alone could bring in billions of dollars per customer going forward, a dramatic upgrade from earlier estimates that put the figure in the hundreds of millions, with new commitments already lined up from customers including Amazon, Cisco, SpaceX, and Tesla. Demand for Intel's actual CPUs has also been strong enough recently That one longtime industry analyst described the current environment bluntly: CPUs are cool again, and Intel can't make enough of them, allowing the company to actually raise prices for the first time in years. That demand is coming specifically from hyperscale customers like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, alongside equipment makers such as Dell, HP, and Lenovo, all scrambling for compute capacity as AI infrastructure spending accelerates industry-wide. In a strange twist, the same AI boom that's helping NVIDIA dominate the accelerator market is also driving some of the strongest CPU demand Intel has seen in years, even as Intel struggles to manufacture enough chips to fully capture it. So the honest picture isn't a company being destroyed by a gloating rival. It's a company simultaneously being propped up and squeezed by the same investor, while cleaning up years of its own strategic mistakes. At the exact moment the entire industry it operates in is being redefined by AI in ways that favor companies with cleaner execution over the last 5 years. NVIDIA doesn't need to laugh at Intel. It just needs Intel's foundry bet to either work out, in which case NVIDIA has a manufacturing hedge against Taiwan, or fail to work out, in which case NVIDIA's own CPUs are ready to take the market Intel can't hold. Either path benefits Jensen Huang. Only one of them saves Intel. It's also worth being honest about what this means for AMD, the company that spent years positioning itself as Intel's main rival. A three-way fight between Intel, AMD, and now NVIDIA over the CPU market changes the calculus for everyone involved.
GeForce 256, the first chip ever to be marketed as a graphics processing unit, or GPU. A piece of hardware that could sit alongside your CPU, which at this time could only process one calculation at a time, and take on the graphics rendering load while you're gaming using far more efficient parallel processing.
AMD has spent enormous effort building its Ryzen AI lineup, specifically to compete with Intel on AI-capable laptops and desktops, and NVIDIA's entry into that same category, backed by essentially unlimited capital and the single most valuable brand in the entire chip industry, threatens to squeeze both legacy competitors at once, rather than just Intel alone. If NVIDIA's reinvention of the PC gains real traction, the story stops being simply Intel versus AMD and becomes a genuinely three-sided contest, one where two of the three participants have spent decades building the manufacturing and design relationships that the newest entrant is only now assembling from scratch. Whether Intel manages to hold its ground long enough for the foundry bet to pay off, or whether this decade ends with NVIDIA's own chips sitting where Intel's used to sit, is genuinely still an open question. But it's not going to be decided by anyone laughing from the outside. It's going to be decided by whether the people running Intel right now can finally stop the self-inflicted damage long enough to let the actual engineering talent inside the company catch up to the promises leadership keeps making. Do you think Intel pulls off the turnaround, or is this partnership just NVIDIA's insurance policy while it builds the thing that replaces Intel entirely? Drop your take in the comments.